About that specifically with Henry Newman, who was a special advisor to one of the key architects of Brexit, Michael Gove, who is the Environment Secretary. Right, what do you think of that then? The Attorney General is going to come up with some kind of fresh advice, potentially change his opinion, which might mean more Brexiteers, Conservative Brexiteers, could vote for this deal. Mrs May will bring it back for a third time.
Yeah, well, first of all, I work for a think tank. I don't speak for Michael. If you want to get him on, I'm sure he's happy to come and talk to you.
I meant in the past you were.
Yeah, I did. So I think, look, the Attorney has given some quite clear advice yesterday, but a huge amount of attention focused on one sentence, which was that there remained a particular risk that if neither side could find a solution, that we could be trapped in the backstop. What he also said, though, was that the idea, which we'd heard previously, that President Macron suggested that just because the French felt like it, or the EU didn't want to negotiate with us, they could hold us in the backstop, even if we were coming up with very sensible proposals, and use that leverage to take more of our fish, to put pressure on Gibraltar, to seek more money, or to give us bad terms on a trade deal. That has now been ruled out. So I don't think the Attorney needs to change his advice. I think he needs to clarify it. And obviously, MPs had almost no time yesterday to actually consider his advice after it was published. There was a huge sort of scrummage and rush to the vote. And I think actually a bit more time to go back and look at what the Attorney really said yesterday could be very sensible.
OK, so do you think that is a realistic outcome then?
I think that the deal coming back a third time, absolutely. I mean, this is fundamentally, there are only three overall choices. We leave without a deal. I think Parliament will do whatever it takes to block that. And I think even those proposing it think it would be very difficult. And they need to remember that there's no majority for that in the Commons. So how would you pass the legislation needed to manage no deal? Just can't see it happening. Or stopping Brexit. We've got lots of people's vote protesters behind us. But the reality is that despite all the noise they're making, there's no majority for that in the Commons. And there's no massive swing for that in the countries. I don't see that happening. So we're talking about a version of a negotiated deal. There's only one version of a deal that the Prime Minister's actually negotiated with Europe. That's her deal. You can tweak it, you can make further changes, but they're relatively minor. So I think the chances of this coming back are very high.
And that would be enough if Geoffrey Cox clarifies his legal advice from yesterday. You think that would be enough to get this over the line? Well,
I think we're already seeing changes within the Eurosceptic camp of the Conservative Party. So yesterday, David Davis, a man who resigned over Chequers, former Brexit secretary, he backed the deal. So clearly, I think there are divisions opening up. Nadine Dorries, hardly a sort of...
But you'd have to get something like 70-odd, 75 Conservative
75 MPs
to change.
Well, not necessarily Conservative, of course.
Oh, right.
So I think we can imagine a scenario where the DUP switch. What the DUP are very concerned about is this idea that Northern Ireland could be, against their will, put in a different regulatory zone from the rest of the UK. Can we find ways of giving assurances on that? Perhaps. That's crucial. Can the Prime Minister persuade a few more dozen of her colleagues to back the deal? And then maybe some Labour MPs could ultimately come across, particularly if this was a free vote. Because ultimately, MPs are pretty much voting irrespective of what the party whip tells them to do anyway. Back in the 70s, when we first went into the EU, we had a free vote. I think that's very likely.
So when could this third meaningful vote be, do you think?
I think it could happen shortly after a defeat shortly after votes today and tomorrow when no deal is taken off the table. Yep. There's an argument for bringing it back then. There's an argument for bringing it back after the European Council towards the end of next week, when we'll see what the terms are that the EU will give us an extension of Article 50. Because those terms might be a very, very long extension. And that could look very unattractive. And then at that point, MPs may decide that this deal is the least worst option, even if they don't love it. OK, so we could have a third vote 6-7 days before the UK is due to leave the EU. Absolutely. I mean, none of this is ideal, but I think that many MPs on both sides of the House voted for Article 50. 80% of MPs triggered Article 50. They're not living up to their responsibilities now, because they're running around saying they don't want no deal, they don't want a second referendum, but they don't like this deal. I'm sorry, this is the deal. And actually, I think it's unbelievable the amount of misunderstanding of what actually is on the table. We listened to very senior backbenchers yesterday speak in the House of Commons, Boris Johnson, for example, giving a vision of this deal which just doesn't meet any of the actual reality of what's been agreed. I think if people step back and look at this deal, even in a worst-case scenario, it allows the UK to control most of its economy, the vast majority of the economy. We'll be able to turn off the tap of all new EU regulations, be able to take control of migration, be able to end all financial contributions. It's a good deal. It's not perfect, but it does deserve the support of MPs.
Thank you very much. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you.
Henry Newman, thank you.